Killer has not been all that fun to play recently, and frankly, I would not blame people if they started swapping to Survivor or just swapping to another game entirely. For what it's worth, I was a Killer main for probably 5 years or so, and here lately, I just can't be bothered to play Killer because it's way harder, it's way more stressful. I'm just not enjoying it like I used to. But sadly, for the actual killers of DBD, switching teams is simply not an option, but what if it was? While sometimes hard to imagine, what if the members of DBD's Rogues Gallery found themselves on the other side of the fence? And if that were to be something Behavior chose to pursue, which killers would make the most sense to put in the Survivor role? Hello friends, I'm DasFood, and today I'm going to run through DBD's current 33 killers and see which ones would make for the most interesting survivors. One quick caveat before we go, however, is that I am not going to just list all of the morally pure killers. Some good-hearted killers will make the list, yes, but sometimes it's more fun to imagine, what if the really nasty villains, what would they be like if they were forced to play the hero? So right out of the gate, I want to emphasize this. I am not ranking them based off of how good of people they were before being corrupted by the entity. We're clear on that? Good. Then let's get started with our first category, which I labeled Just Wouldn't Work. There are 10 killers in this category, and while I'm open to outside of the box options for the concept of this video, some killers just simply don't work as survivors. No matter how much we twist them and alter them, they're just not going to work. You can probably guess most of the killers that make this list, so we're going to do pretty quick entries for all 10 of these. First up, we have the shape Michael Myers, and look, this is less a human being and more a vessel in which evil itself can kind of go around and carry out its wishes, so the literal embodiment of evil just doesn't really work for being a survivor. As interesting as it may be to try to make that work, it just never would. He would never cooperate with the other survivors in any way. Next up is the Nightmare Freddy Krueger, and this one's kind of like Michael in the sense that, yeah, he's just super evil, but really more than anything, I'm willing to get creative with some of them. You'll see that I have some evil ones are listed as, oh yeah, that'd be fun to see what they can do, but in the case of the Nightmare, because of the nature of his crimes, which I'm not going to say because I don't want to get demonetized, but I'm not talking about the murders, yeah, I don't see a world where we could have a guy like that on the quote-unquote good guys, right? That's a bridge too far when it comes to something like this, because DBD is escapism, and it's this funny place where we can do things we wouldn't do in the real world, so we can look past murder and all that, because again, it's a horror slasher video game, whatever. But the nature of Freddy's crimes mean that he just would not be somebody anybody would be alright with seeing as a survivor. And it's unfortunate, but it is what it is, right? Such is the price of getting the 2010 version and not the classic one. Even though the classic one was also kind of rumored to be, but I digress. Next up is the Cannibal, or Bubba, and I promise I'm not just going through all of the licensed ones, but you wouldn't know it. But yeah, look, Bubba isn't really a bad guy, which is a weird thing to say about somebody who cuts people's faces off and puts their bodies in chili, but he definitely doesn't work as a good guy either, right? Leatherface's outlook on life means he simply exists more as a force of nature than anything else. Sometimes he helps, sometimes he hurts, but he's never entirely to blame for his actions. Heal, hurt, Bray Wyatt or The Fiend. Regardless, he's just untrustworthy at the end of the day, so Cannibal just doesn't really work as a survivor. Next up is the Demogorgon. It's a literal monster, you know, not metaphorically, but literally. This one could never work. There's just never going to be a world where this works as a survivor. As funny as it would be to watch the Demogorgon working on gens, like the sight alone would be hilarious, but no, it doesn't work. It's too animalistic to actually count for anything like this. Next would be Pyramid Head, the Executioner, and while Pyramid Head isn't necessarily evil, it's not really a thing that can work towards survival either. It's a manifestation, not a person, so for the sake of our list, it does not count. Next, I'm going to surprise everybody and say the twins. Or maybe you're not surprised, maybe you saw it coming, I don't know, you're smart, maybe you saw it coming, but either way, they would either have to be two separate characters or probably just Charlotte or Victor, where you can swap between them with skins, but that defeats the entire purpose of the twins. They don't work in the same way that Talita and Hinatu do, where they're just really close. The whole point of the twins is that they're conjoined, right? So this one just doesn't really work when you get past that kind of fun idea of it, because, you know, again, they were good people in life, or at least Charlotte, who got to show her personality a little bit more because Victor died so young. But yeah, no, there's just really not a world where this one works, unfortunately, because, you know, I am one of like the 5 people who defends the twins, but for the sake of our exercise here today, they don't work. Next is the Nemesis, and look, I mean, this thing, look, as funny as it would be, it's a no for me. It just doesn't work. It's too big. It's too uniquely focused on killing the stars. There's no world where this one would actually make any sense at all unless you just want to completely butcher and downsize the character. So Nemesis doesn't work, and neither does the next one, Cenobite. So we have technically seen the Cenobites work as good guys before. I think it was the second Hellraiser movie where they did that. And we have seen Pinhead in his human form. So that's all good, but this one just makes very little sense from a lore perspective. Because yes, we've seen it, but I think doing this, I think that having, what was his... I forget his name when he was in his human form. I should have put that in the notes here. But I think that having the Cenobites as good guys would only actually serve to harm the very concept of the Cenobites. Because what's cool about them is they go through this transformation, and it's awful, and it's brutal, and it's gory. But then they actually come out the other side liking where they are. They like being Cenobites. So if they were to change sides, that just wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense. Elliot Spencer, by the way. Elliot Spencer. I just thought of it. I think that's his name. But yeah, so anyway, Cenobite would not work. Next to last for this category, we have the Dredge, and this is where we throw our heads back and laugh. This one does not work. No. How would the Dredge be a survivor? How do you even do that? What do you do to make that work? It's impossible. It's not going to happen. It's an eldritch horror. It's not going to work. And then finally, we have the Xenomorph, and this is just Demogorgon Part 2, both in how the character plays and why it wouldn't work as a survivor. It's far too animalistic to actually be a thinking survivor. I mean, look, again, would it be funny to see the Xenomorph, teabagging on the other side of the pallet or just working on a generator? Yeah, it'd be hilarious, but it doesn't work. The next category is even larger. I put 12 in this one, and it's what I call boring choices. Now, I understand that calling these choices quote-unquote boring is going to rub some people the wrong way, but please hear me out. Anybody can pick the nicest, most innocent killers and say, gee, I sure wish they were on the other side, but it's way more fun to take the odd cases and see how they work as survivors. The following characters wouldn't necessarily be bad survivors, they just aren't exciting survivors. Call this the Felix Richter or Adam Francis tier. No disrespect, but I mean, I guess there is some disrespect in that. First up, we have Trapper, and look, yeah, okay, fine. Yeah, he's the cover boy, but he's also kind of boring. I mean, there are hints that Evan McMillan's a bit of a survivalist, but there's not much for us to really sink our teeth into with this character. As far as I'm concerned, there are better choices, though I do like that Evan canonically resists the entity more than most killers do, so that is cool. That's a little bit of flavor, and if we get more, maybe he'll get bumped up on this list someday. Next up is Wraith. It feels to me like this exercise almost demands Philip Ojomo swap teams, but personally, I'm just not sure I fully see the appeal. Like, sure, he's shy and he's averse to cruelty, but we don't really have much else to go off of with him. Maybe he could be a good stealthy survivor, but for me, I'm just looking for more engaging options. So again, not a bad choice, but not really a fun one either. We're going to round out the original three here and put Hillbilly on here and say that yes, Max Thompson Jr. suffered a tremendous amount during his upbringing, like a tremendous amount. But as we saw with the artist, putting a character through the proverbial ringer doesn't necessarily make them just inherently interesting. Peel back the disturbing backstory and what's left of Thompson Jr. Not much, I would wager. Moving on, we come to the nurse, and people may assume that Sally Smithson is just too evil to be a survivor, but I do disagree with that. The more evil a killer is, the more unique it becomes to imagine them fighting the entity. What rules Sally out for me is not her evil, but is that she's another one-note character with little to distinguish her from the crowd. Sadness, objectionable morals, and what else? She's just not all that interesting as a human, which would be mean to say about a real person, but thankfully it's a fictional character. So yeah, as a human being, she just kind of bores me. Next is the Hag. Lisa Sherwood has debatably the weakest lore of any, I was gonna say any killer, but really the entire roster. And honestly, that's saying a lot because there's some pretty bad lore in this game at spots. So what's worse, I think, is that the thing that would be her gimmick as a survivor, Boons, it's already taken and very strongly associated with Michaela, so she can't even have that. She wasn't a bad person or anything like that, but I just really don't think there's any room for Lisa Sherwood as a survivor. Maybe you guys see it differently. I'd love to see her get some love in some kind of way, but really I think she should just get probably a rewrite on her backstory because it's not very good in its current iteration. Next, we have one that it's gonna get me in trouble, right? It's Pig. This one's going to get me in trouble, but I stand by it. While I love the Saw films, and Shawnee Smith does a great, just tremendous job as Amanda Young, she's the weakest link of the Jigsaw killers, and it's not particularly close. John Kramer is supernaturally intelligent, while Hoffman is a dangerous combination of brains and brawn. But what does Amanda bring to the table? Ugh, she's not particularly clever, she's not patient, she lacks a code to live by. In every way, she is inferior to her colleagues. She's worse than most of the survivors too, so I don't really see the appeal here. And just like that, I earned my dislikes. Okay, next we have Ghostface. People will probably disagree, but of the existing serial killers in the game, Ghostface would make for one of the least interesting survivors. He's got the serial killer thing going for him, but what else? Unlike Legion's camaraderie, Clown's sadism, or the Doctor's curiosity, Ghosty pretty much just has his naughty behavior. He's not a terrible choice, mind you, but I just don't think he's a very exciting one either. Moving on, we get the Oni, and Kazan Yamaoka is a pretty awesome character. I really do love the Oni, but he simply works way better as a killer. Nearly everything that could apply to Kazan as a survivor could also work even better for his distant relative Rin Yamaoka, so if they were going to go that route, I'd rather it be Rin than Kazan. But again, I do love Kazan, it's just not a good fit here. Next we have the Trickster, and I promise you I don't hate this character as much as it must seem like I do. I just don't think he makes for a very exciting survivor. Or killer to face, to be fair. But, you know, what would his theme be? Meg is sporty, David is tough, the Lyras work together, but what would Ji-woon do? What is his theme as a survivor? I mean, yeah, he's a K-pop star, but how do you translate that, right? Something based around getting attention, maybe? But regardless, he's just not that interesting. I think there are better, more interesting selections to be made here. Even though I know the Trickster faithful, they're very loyal, they love their guy, and that's awesome, but I'm not going to pick them. Next up is the Artist. I don't expect much pushback on this one. Yes, we all know Carmina Mora was one of the better people that ended up as a killer, but as I've stated 1 million times, good morals do not necessarily equate to a good survivor. Take Jeff and Yunjin. One is definitely a better person, the other is definitely a better survivor. Carmina falls in the camp of being good but boring, so probably best to skip her for this one. Moving on, we get the Onryo, and I'm tempted to put Sadako elsewhere, but here's the thing. She doesn't get to use her powers in the fog. If she did, most killers wouldn't stand a chance, right? It's how we've always justified, I don't know, Susie from the Legion beating up David. It just works differently there. So if she's a survivor, she's got no shot. Which takes out a lot of what makes her special. So basically, we have to go with an underpowered or unpowered Sadako, which is essentially a character that's never existed because she always had the powers to some extent, even though she had to kind of learn them and all that, whatever. But I'm not saying it couldn't work. I'm just saying I like Sadako more with her powers, and I don't see the reason that we would take them away. Next to last here, we get the Knight, and the big issue with the Knight in this particular exercise is that most of what can be said in his favor can also be said for the Legion. Unlike Legion though, the Knight's companions are mostly uncharacterized, and Tarhosh himself is evil to a Sauron-like degree. He's also a mountain of a man, so hiding behind mid-level loops would just be out of the question for Tarhosh mains, but again, it'd be cool to have, you know, a Hungarian survivor. I mean, I'm all for it, I just don't necessarily think it works, but you know, prove me wrong, behavior. And then finally, we get to Skull Merchant. Yeah, I hate this character, and I have no desire to see her in survivor form or in any other form, really. Getting teabagged by an Adriana after she pops adrenaline would literally be the straw that breaks the camel's back and makes me leave the game. Next. We now get to the final part here, which is actually kind of the meat of the video. This is what I really wanted to talk about. These are the top options. These are the killers that I say, wow, I would love to see what they would be like as a survivor. And you may have kind of done some math in your head and realized who's still left, and you're probably like, oh wow, some of these are surprising options. And I tried to go that way. I wanted to actually give some interesting thoughts. Again, not just the nice ones, but the interesting ones. So, while some of these will seem strange, these are the killers I'd most like to see as survivors. I tried to take themes into account when choosing these because most survivors have some kind of theme to them, but be warned. Most of these are pretty bad people, so I don't blame you if you think their hearts are just too dark to be on the good team. But remember, with people like Yunjin, people like Jonah, there are some pretty already not so great survivors in terms of their morality. So we're going to bend that, we're going to push it to its extreme, but just play along. I think it's a fun exercise. First up, we have the Huntress, and right, so Anna would just be Jake Park's survivalist gimmick, but on steroids. Because of her exploits during the First World War, I see her having at least one fight back type of perk along the lines of head on maybe, or smash hit or something like that. I could also see some kind of stealth perk here, given that she knows how to slip through the forest like few others. As for her last perk, I could see it being something related to being a lone wolf maybe, even though whatever that one Lori perk is that's all about being alone, or like the Bill, left behind, all that, those are pretty bad perks. I don't really want to saddle Anna with that, but if it's what we gotta do, it's what we gotta do. But overall, Anna's theme as a survivor, it's pretty clear. It's just what I said at the start of this entry. Jake Park, but stronger and more feral, possibly more violent. Moving on, we get the Doctor. And okay, so this entry, this is the one I was thinking about when I kept saying that I wasn't just going to stick to the most moral options for killers turned survivors, right? And while I know this one seems crazy, just imagine it for a moment. Imagine if the entity took Herman Carter in, and instead of making him a demigod of punishment that he would go on to become, what if he was on the receiving end of the punishment? Carter may be evil, yeah, nobody's denying that, but he's also highly intelligent, resourceful, and driven. He makes for a very fearsome and terrible enemy, but as your goals align, he may make for a pretty solid ally. I see Herman having perks based around gen repairs, though he'd also likely have something along the lines of calm spirit that keeps him cool when others are nervous. Regardless, his one-of-a-kind intelligence would need to be a factor in designing what Doctor would like to, what he would be like as a survivor, because that's basically his calling card, is just how smart he is. Next is the Clown. Right, okay, so this continues the trend of characters who are on the good team, but they're not good guys. Amongst DBD's gallery of rogues, Kenneth Chase, the Clown, stands as one of the more depraved and sadistic entries. Even still, he's an absolute tank of a man that makes even the likes of David King look small. I'd love to see Kenneth as a survivor, if only because it would be really cool to see a survivor who combines strength, speed, and depravity like the Clown does. He would need perks that either function as being self-serving or brutish in some way, and I think that would be really cool to see however they decided to implement that. As a bonus, it would also be great if both Chase and Carter did their laughs when they pulled off a stun or a flashlight blind, because hey, those are some of my favorite things in the game. I think they're just kind of adorable in their own way, and I would like to see them carried over to the survivor side as well. Next, this one is a popular choice. It's the Legion. So, I mentioned that Knight was a poorer version of what Legion could be as a survivor, but what exactly could Legion be? Well, first off, I think they'd need to be two characters. Give me Frank and Susie with legendary skins that turn them into Julie and Joey, respectively. Frank would need a leadership perk of some kind, but the real draw would be the teamwork perks, or more specifically, getting more teamwork perks. We saw teamwork perks introduced with the Lyra siblings, but they haven't popped up again since, and I'm worried that Behavior has kind of ditched that idea, but they shouldn't, because it's a cool idea, not necessarily executed well the first time, but still a cool idea. Make it so that Legion survivors who stick together power each other up in some way, and you'll be doing the characters justice. Or, okay, it would be more lore accurate for Frank's perks to buff himself while weakening those around him, but that's just bad game design, and it begs BM, so probably best to avoid that. But anyway, overall, this is one of the more exciting ones, and I can only imagine how many cosmetics Behavior would sell for them. This would do some money. This would do some business. Next is the Spirit. Okay, so Spirit. Much like Legion, I did mention Spirit earlier in this video, basically tipped my hand that she was going to be in the finale, and I was saying that she would be a preferable character over a similar killer. In this instance, I was saying that I liked Spirit more than Oni when it comes to creating a survivor, especially maybe one that's like a rage-based survivor, because not only is Rin a better person by modern morality, but she's also got more reason to be angry. That in mind, I'd be excited to see a survivor where the more abuse they take, the more their perks reward them or help them to bounce back in some way. Think Renewal or Medal of Man, for example, perks along those lines. So Rin is a great underdog character, and I'd love to see her get a stab at being a survivor somewhere down the line. Moving on, we get the Plague, Adirus. Not all pure-hearted killers make for boring survivors, as evidenced by the Plague, of course formerly known as Adirus, who easily stands as one of DBD's most interesting and tragic characters. Born to nothing, she rose to great prominence as a Babylonian priestess who led her people during a time of great hardship. Considering her backstory, the roadmap for her perks is easy enough to chart, I would say. Her religious faith lends itself well to being a boon-based survivor, likely with one that heals in some way, and possibly even another that does something else entirely different, but maybe not. In an ideal world, she would have perks like Circle of Healing for the people and Empathy. While it's fair to say she got a little caught up in the moment from time to time, and I think she enjoyed the attention a little too much, Adiris was ultimately a caring, loving person, and it's sad to see a husk of her former self living on as the Plague. Of all the options listed today, this is one I would just really love to see. Next, we get the Deathslinger. This would be the most perfect option on this entire video, or in this entire video, if Felix Richter didn't exist. And look, I love Felix. Of course, Das Food loves Felix. Das Essen liebst Felix. But there's no denying that he and Deathslinger are very, very similar. Much like Richter, Caleb Quinn was an inventor and a tinkerer. His mind understood machines like few others and would lend itself well to perks like Built to Last, Felix, Prove Thyself, and even a weak perk like Technician. Gross, I know, but it does fit the theme. This would also work because, all things being considered, Caleb wasn't that bad of a guy. He was a tough guy in a tough time. Yes, but for the most part he lived by a code of honor and did right by those who were willing to work with him and not screw him over. I don't think he'd have any trouble making friends in the fog, which, after the life that he had, I think that's kind of wholesome. Next up, Blight. And just like that, the wholesomeness of the last entry is over. Talbot the Blight Grimes is not a wholesome man. In fact, he was more monster than man even before the entity took hold of him. Grimes is madly dedicated to science and progress, and if history has taught us anything, it's that one can absolutely go too far with science. Still, Grimes would make for a fascinating survivor, if only because we've never had a mad scientist before. We've had a scientist with Claudette, but never a mad scientist. I love the thought of perks that offer both risks and rewards, as these types of experiments tend to, like Autodidact or Plot Twist. Grimes would risk it all in search of the answers he seeks, and I believe that would make for a very, very, very unique survivor. Up next, we have the Mastermind. So, what's interesting about the Mastermind, or Wesker, let's call him Wesker, is that one doesn't really have to imagine what he would be like as a good guy. In the original Resident Evil, he started out working alongside Jill, Chris, and Barry, and it isn't until later that his wickedness is revealed. By the way, spoiler alert for a very, very old game. Sorry. So there is a world where Albert Wesker works alongside genuinely good people to achieve his goals. If he thought the entity was out to get him, Wesker would make for a fierce ally, though you could never fully trust him. In many ways, he's similar to Ada Wong. They both make for solid help if they want the same thing that you do, but they'll ultimately always look out for themselves first and foremost. Still, I love the thought of getting the band back together, so I'd be hyped to see Wesker helping out his former STARS colleagues, as unlikely as it is. Also, while we're at it, Barry for DBD? Yes? Please? And then finally, we reach the last entry here, which is the Singularity. And for this last one, I want to go with an option that would probably, I think most would probably view as being a just wouldn't work category type of candidate. But I do strongly disagree with that. I love the thought of Hux transferring his consciousness into a physical body, albeit this time one that's slightly less disturbing and horrific than the body he chose the first time around, the one that came to be known as the Singularity. And the cool thing about Hux as a survivor is that the cosmetic options would be literally limitless. Yeah, we can talk about how he would play, what his theme would be, but really, any cosmetic that they wanted to create could be justified as Hux transferring his mind into a new vessel. This would allow for tons of creativity for the art team, and we all know that the art team is the ultimate powerhouse behind Dead by Daylight. When all else fails, the art team is going to be killing it. That has been remarkably consistent. This would be outside of the box, like super outside of the box, yes. But don't forget that Gabriel himself is already a clone, so there is a precedent for generally wacky ideas. I'm not sure how others would feel about this one, but Hux as a survivor just feels like the good ending, and darn it, I think we all need that. I'm at least for it, but anyway, that's gonna do it for me. Let me know what you thought of the video. Do you like it? Did you hate it? Do you just think I'm a stupid idiot who got it all wrong? Hey, let me know if that's how you feel. Maybe don't phrase it that way, I am sensitive, but anyway. Hope you had a good time. Please do like, subscribe, do the whole thing, follow me on Twitch, yada yada yada. It's all plugs at the end of the video, but anyway, the important part is I hope you're having a lovely lovely day wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope you continue living your best life. And until the next one, I've been Dustfood. Bye, friends.
I've been dreaming on in my head like I've seen it. A life worth living is a life with meaning. I'll do what I love till my heart stops beating. I'm feeding this demon. Got a taste, can't erase bitterness in my